We're here to discuss your art today. I find it quite esoteric, but what would you, if you had to put it in a box, call it?
Symbolism, for a number of reasons. One is that symbolism incorporates the suggestion that what you're seeing isn't the whole story, that it has a kind of that it can take on a life of its own archetypally in the consciousness of the viewer, that it may be pointing towards other things, that it may be pointing towards the process of becoming, in that sense that it can have an interaction or kind of a reference to duration-based art forms like, say, music or dance, that it isn't based entirely upon the observable world, but it has components of the observable world. This is a trait that you find in art, I mean, pretty much all art, really, before, I would say, before the early 20th century. You find it in indigenous and folk arts from throughout the world. You have these marvellous hybrid creatures. They mean something to the people who created the artwork, they may mean something else to us. But that there's an engagement, we're invited to engage with it, with our own subconscious, with our own associations. Also in saying that, it's not to define oneself negatively, but it is a rejection of the dominant art forms and ideas since perhaps after the First World War. The idea being that you had there was naturalism and then there was perhaps romanticism, or which came first? Did they cross over? You have impressionism, post-impressionism and expressionism and so forth. This idea that photography liberated the artist from the burden of representation, which is nonsense really, because Western art, I mean, it was never just about representation. It was never about simply recording the factors of the observable world as you would with a camera. The eye doesn't work like that. The eye is moving all the time. When you look at a Titian painting, the world doesn't look like that. And all is in flux and in motion all the time. But it's very, very interesting because symbolism was a bit of a dirty word. It's been kind of largely, they kind of pass over it in that school of thinking because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the kind of post-Enlightenment materialist reading of art and the human experience.
How are you inspired to make these kinds of paintings?
Sometimes I'll have an idea. Often I'll be listening to a piece of music and something about it. There'll be a feeling that I want to convey. Because our feelings, our thoughts, and our sensations, we have so many thoughts and memories constantly. We're never here. We're in the past, we're in the future. The present just doesn't exist. And particularly because painting is a static art form, I mean, which I'm very, very conscious of as a musician. You're dealing with duration, something that takes place in time. Painting kind of just takes place in space. So it's a way of concretizing, perhaps catching and giving form to these fleeting sensations. And perhaps a way as well of exploring ideas and thought processes yourself.
In your paintings there's a lot of dance and movement and postures, and I wondered if you could discuss that a bit more, please.
Again, it's a way of trying to capture something, one of these duration-based art forms, dance and music, but in a static form. Of the two paintings that you were talking about earlier, this one here of the mother and child and this one here of these figures, both of these are meditations upon the connection to the other and unity of some kind. The mother and child, I mean, I've wanted to paint a mother and child for a while. The gaze of the mother, where we feel absolutely accepted and loved and lose our shape, lose our sense of self and melt into something. It's a glorious oneness that I think that we spend the rest of our lives looking for. And I don't know, we have moments of it. We have moments of that kind of transcendental experience where we can rise above ourselves. But by and large, we're divided. By and large, we're divided within ourselves. And if people don't, I mean, I would say kind of like, you know, if you doubt that, just look at the films you watch, the music you listen to. There's probably a very, very high content of drama, of light and shade, of conflict there, because it's representing our own conflicted natures. We're beset by so many fears, so many anxieties, appetites that we probably don't, we feel that we have a problem controlling. I mean, I was thinking of this recently, the term sexual liberation, not in terms of kind of like, say, legislation, but in terms that you can actually free yourself from an appetite. Well, yeah, you can when you die, probably. Well, I assume, we don't know what we're going on to in the next life. We could just go on to even more kind of like, say, appetites that run us around the place. But you can't, I mean, you can't liberate yourself from these urges and desires any more than you can liberate yourself from hunger or thirst. You can satiate yourself in the short term, you can gorge yourself, you can try to deny yourself. But the thing is, we have a constant conflict. We're here, but we're not here. We're living in the future and the past. And it's a cliche, but it's very, very true. You know, everybody wants to change the world and nobody wants to change themselves. I will say I'm anti-utopian for a variety of reasons. One is because we need to take into account just how divided we are within ourselves. And that self, again, getting back to, I'd really like to see actually Gurdjieff's perspective on social media and social media meltdowns, especially in the last few years politically. It'd be very, very interesting. But also as an artist, utopian art? What is that? What is that? That is static. That is not. That is, well, I don't know. I don't know. There's art that brings about peace. Certainly, that's lovely. But you have to be dubious of anything that seeks to create the perfect state of being. Because by whose definition? I mean, who sets the terms? And I mean, it's something I heard a number of times when people would talk about oneness. We're all one. Provided you vote like me and eat like me and believe the same things as me, then we're all one. So okay, right, right? Yeah, we are all one. You know, in the sense that there's a very, very complex dance going on of creation that we don't understand. You know, but we're divided enough within ourselves. I think we got plenty of work to get on with.
Your art has obviously a lot to ponder on when we look at it, which is what you're driving at here. But we have a lot of mythological and I would say archetypical characters in it.
Mm-hmm.
We could discuss that a little bit.
Okay. Well, I'm very, very interested in a lot of the archetypal or mythological beings, mainly for aesthetic reasons. I mean, I quite often have painted fauns and nymphs. And I confess I don't know enough about the original, the mythology of ancient Greece. And I mean, you know, the culture of ancient Greece, you could spend a lifetime immersing yourself in because it's so rich and so wonderful. And that's a culture that really had legs. I mean, it could translate, it could live outside of its space and time because the ideas are fertile. I mean, for me, like say, for example, fauns, who I'm quite interested in, my approach to them would be probably similar to, or my interest in them would come probably from Mallarmé via Debussy. Kind of what it would have meant to, like say, a man like Mallarmé. What does the faun say? He's part man, part animal. So he's a unit. He's unified. His animal, erotic nature, his drives and his appetites are unified to, are married, harmonized with his rational, ethical self, and in an Arcadian, Edenic setting, a place of peace, a place of harmony from this conflict, from the divide I was just talking about. I find that very, very beautiful, and I find it very engaging, and I find it a respite to get lost in that. You know, because as an anti-utopian, I can be a little bit jaundiced and pessimistic in my view of things. So, but of course, that's necessary as well. It's necessary as well to seek something, perhaps outside of your life, through art, to seek to create something that isn't already there, and particularly in the realms of archetypes, because they live in us all. They're already there. They're already waiting to be interacted with, and because we all have a very, very rich subconscious kind of pantheon of associations and beings, and it's you're sparking something hopefully with the viewer. You're kind of you're inviting them to engage with aspects of themselves. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I've had it a number of times with pieces of music I hear, and I think, God, that's me. That's a part of myself that I wasn't even aware of, but it is home and it is me. obviously that's a big ask. I mean, to expect to have that kind of, to affect people like that. But the great thing about it is it's out of your hands. You don't know what sort of effect it's likely to have on people. And it's not your place to know. It's your place to do it and then just let it go and see where it ends up. It's the working out of ideas. Largely, it's the working out of ideas. Because you were talking earlier about we were talking earlier, I should say, about Greek mythology and about paganism and what role, if any, of these might play in the paintings I'm working on. And as I said, I don't know enough directly about Greek mythology, but I find it, or Greek culture, mythology, it's so rich and vast. And as I said, it's impressive in the sense that it has a life outside of its place and time. It continued to have an influence and exert an influence on our world to this day and age. And that's something I would look for. I remember having this thought about 10 years ago. I should say that up until a few years ago, I would have described myself as pagan. And about 10 years ago, I was listening to the St. Matthew Passion by Bach. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. There's got to be something in this to inspire this music. Now, of course, Bach was a genius. And music is entirely objective. You can actually say it's about anything. But I think it's not particularly wise to try to posthumously impose our own methodology and values upon kind of like, say, a past age. I have no reason to doubt Bach's sincerity. But I remember when that occurred to me, I remember thinking kind of like, say, well, is there the potential for a pagan equivalent to the St. Matthew Passion or the Sistine Chapel ceiling? And I should say, when I'm saying pagan, I mean kind of like, say, contemporary paganism, which is either traditional or, for many people, or perhaps Wicca. There's other types, of course, but ones I'm kind of familiar with. And what I would be looking for really is something that would have an eternal and universal value, where it's able to transcend its age, the locality, and the people from whence it came. Now we're coming up to Christmas or Yule, and many pagans quite reasonably say, well, Christians stole our festivals and our symbols and stuff like that. And I say, well, yeah, there's truth there. But another way of looking at it is perhaps that Christianity, or the culture that grew around it, preserved these beautiful, charming folk practices that would have otherwise been lost at the passing of time. You see, we have to think about would people have been able to carry these belief systems and these practices, particularly as they made the transition from localized, homogenous, rural agrarian societies into kind of more atomized or globally conscious industrialized cities? Would they have been able to kind of maintain that? And one thing we need to bear in mind here is the people's kind of self-consciousness often about their kind of traditions and their roots and things like that. I remember, because I've lived in the UK for nearly 30 years, and a number of times I had this experience where English people would say, oh, I love Irish folk music, but they'd express kind of disdain for English folk, like, say, or Morris or something like that. They'd consider it hey nonny and corny and a bit embarrassing. And for every Cecil Sharp who seeks to preserve and cherish these traditions, a number of people who would just dismiss it because they find something, essentially, for want of a better term, uncool about it. And this isn't confined. I mean, there's a song on Funkadelic's first album. The song's called Mommy, What's a Funkadelic? It's a monologue. He says, I recall when I lived in a little town in North Carolina, I tried to escape this music. I said it was for the old country folk. I went to New York, got slick, I was cool, but I had no groove. So there you have the case of the person leaving the blues heartlands or the kind of hillbilly place, being very, very self-conscious about their folksy, rootsy traditions, making them, kind of an object of ridicule, wanting to be urbane and sophisticated and being kind of not wanting to be embarrassing and parochial. So this is another thing. Would these practices have survived that kind of shift? There's so many things that we can kind of consider with that. How this actually pertains as well to art is, my own theory is that a lot of the the art that I've been talking about negatively, kind of like say from the 20th century, mid to late modernist stuff, is that its survival or success, if you could call it success, is based upon people's vanity. And what I mean by that is this: if you look at a landscape by Claude Lorraine, it's very, very obviously very, very beautiful. Anybody can see that. But what brownie points are in that for you? How does that make you feel cool and sophisticated? No, frown at, a glass of water on a glass shelf. Frown. That's you're being profound. Yes? And you're complicit in this phony kind of, because it's entirely phony, because if you outside of the gallery system, and make no mistake about it, this model has been pushed relentlessly through the academies, the gallery system, the curation system, the media, relentlessly for well over 100 years. But back to kind of like say, would they have flourished? Would they have thrived in the way kind of like say that the culture of ancient Greece did, the culture of Egypt did, for example? I think that one thing when we're talking about kind of metaphysics or spiritual reality is one thing that I would look for is to differentiate between what it is that you want, what it is you want to see, or what it is you want to incorporate into your life as the self that you believe yourself to be. And my friend Gurdjieff would have had interesting things to say about the self. Well, who or what is this self? Or is the spiritual metaphysical reality, or accepting what we don't want to look at, what we don't want, that something is not, that is in no way, shape or form an embellishment of our lives, of our identity, and something that's uncomfortable for us? Would it be something that would kind of like say, meet kind of Buddha's reflections on the nature of suffering? Or with the St. Matthew Passion for Bach, the nature of the cross, carrying this, your body broken and flayed, carrying this burden, being spat at and shouted at. And think about that. I mean, people go into meltdowns over a Facebook post, carrying this thing to eventually be hung and to die in agony while your loved ones look on helplessly. Now, hopefully, most of us will avoid that fate, but we can't avoid just the essential tragedy. That is, everyone you know will die, and it's not going to be pretty. It's probably going to be slow and painful. We ourselves are going to die. We're going to die. That's a little bit easier to handle because we hope that we're not going to be witness to it. But what we are witness to is the little sneak previews of death. By our 30s, usually we've experienced bereavement. We've begun to have the experience where we look in the mirror and we don't recognize the being, the self that's in the mirror, because the self that we're identifying with, those cells have up and gone. And as time goes along, we're looking in the mirror thinking, oh God, I look terrible. And this is the best I'm ever going to look. It's downhill all the way from here. And it's the loss of those little vanities, those shibboleths, those things that we hold to, how we identify ourselves. It's those little losses. They're in many ways as important for us to consider than the greater losses like, bereavement and suffering. Now, I'm not saying that those characteristics, that isn't covered in neo-paganism, because I simply don't know enough about neo-paganism, and there may well be pagan Bachs and Michelangelos out there that I'm not aware of. I haven't looked into it enough to know, and maybe with time, they may come about. I mean, you could say it was easy for say somebody like Bach or Michelangelo because they had the weight of that culture behind them. But equally, I mean, for a socialist realist painter or artist in Soviet Russia, they had the weight of the state behind them. I mean, it's fine if your idea of architecture is concrete blocks and you like ballets about tractors and things. That's fine, Equally, if you like, glasses of water on shelves these days, that's the weight culturally is behind that. But I think that for me, the spiritual or esoteric, or the metaphysical or spiritual reality is about as much to do with what we don't want to look at than what we would choose to look at.
So your art is hopefully making the viewer think about this and look at perhaps at themselves and at what they don't want to see.
Probably. I'm probably enough of a I'm probably waspish enough to want to rain on people's parades. A little bit. Well, I'd like it. I mean, how much control do you have over your work? You do it and it leaves you It leaves you, and then it can, hopefully, it can take on some kind of life that's independent. That's the best you can hope for as an artist, that your work will assume a life that's independent of you. That's a big ask. But it's, that's it. Forget about glory, forget about wealth, or even influencing people. Hope that, it's going to reach somebody and it will create some kind of field of resonance with them. But I would like it to prompt some kind of thought, at least. Or at the very least, to hell being a pretty distraction, being a nice shape, conglomeration of shapes and colours for them to look at for a while. There's enough ugliness around there. Lots of it in my paintings, but I hope that it's in some way, it transcends that, or that the ugliness is in some way transcended. I don't know. What do I know? I merely paint the things.
Would you like to discuss colour?
Well, it's not drawing, that's for sure. I'm terrible at drawing. I'm so utterly impatient with drawing and with the lack of colour. It's funnily enough, actually, I only use about 5 colours, 5 tubes of paint, that is. And I have favourite ones. There's this kind of like bottle green sort of blue thing that occurs all the time. They're not of any particular significance, but colour is I suppose the best way to describe it would be, if you think of orchestration with a piece of music, it's orchestrated, that's the colour. Whereas if you were to kind of like say a piano transcript of kind of an orchestral piece, that would be the form, or some kind of people like Van Gogh, I think he said that colour is form, but usually the form is usually kind of like, say, the compositional shaping and balancing of things. But the colour is the intoxication when you're painting. That's the compositional aspect. The drawing out is tedium beyond belief. The colour is like uncorking a bottle and just whoa. And the colour is it's here's a ridiculous analogy. It's like riding a bike. The compositional aspect is like the uphill, but then like the colour aspect is something that's a dream world you can get lost in.
Your paintings are very much like a dream world to get lost in.
Good, or a nightmare.
But also a lot of your paintings are covers to your music that you make. Can you discuss a little bit about what music you make?
Far harder to describe, probably because music is very, very, very abstract by its nature. But I think that it's very, very inclusive ideas and intention. And intention isn't necessarily the same as the result, It's very, very close to what I've already discussed. That is, it's the music I make is very, very much about states of becoming. Being between things, moments of contemplation, the cracks that you slip into that may be very good and maybe not so good. And the difference is, of course, that they take place over a period of time and they will stop after, 30 odd minutes or something like that. I would say as well, music is a harder sell. If you're an artist, if you like me, if you paint and make music, it's far, far easier to sell an image because it demands a lot less of people's attention. They simply look at it. And they can spend as much time looking at it as they want. Whereas with a piece of music, you have to give it over, like say for, be it 5 minutes or 5 hours, you have to pay attention to it. And also because of the nature of the way music works, the way sound works as a sense, which I think is very, very similar to smell, in that its ability to transform, to take us right back to another place, is, I would argue, a lot stronger than an image. Like you hear a piece of music and you're there, like when there's a smell that takes you right back to a particular place. It's very, very powerful. Not entirely to be trusted though, it can really, really work. I don't know. It's one of these things that you find as you get older, that the most dreadful, trivial nonsense music of your youth assumes this dreadful poignance because it is a time capsule taking you to somewhere where you no longer are. But it's harder because music has this incredible, powerful interaction with our emotions. Everybody loves the music that they love. That sounds mundane, but what I mean by that is their reasons for loving it are mixed up with how much is anything ever about kind of our appreciation of the content itself, but particularly with music, there's all these other associations, all these other emotions mixed up. And what happens is I do it myself. You play a piece of music to a person, automatically you're saying, that's like this, you're looking for a referent for it. And where there are no references, it just doesn't seem to make sense to you. And it's difficult, getting people to sit down and say, no, just try to switch off for 20 minutes or something like that. Difficult is impossible. But nonetheless, you hope you hope that it can assume an existence independent of you.
I don't think anyone you can compare your art to anybody else's. You're very unique.
Oh, thank you. Really? That's great. I didn't realise that. Good. Thanks. I mean, I will say I find it very, very hard to objectively see my stuff, see my work. I find it a lot easier to be objective about music, actually. With painting, often I'm working away on something because I have a vague sense of a shape, and I've absolutely no idea how to go about making that. Because it's grappling, that makes it sound very dramatic. It's dealing with, come on, it's a painting, it's not like I'm building a roof or something. It's dealing with archetypal things, it's dealing with things that are well subconscious, my conscious, let alone the viewers. So I can sometimes something can happen like that and it's absolutely right. More often than not it isn't. More often than not I'll have about 3 paintings on the go and I'll have to slog away until they feel like the thing that wants to come through. And I'm subordinate to the thing that wants to come through.